is a little told. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. How many of you know who said that? How many of you know who said that? Well, Warren said that till we get it. Not too many. And who was it? Doug? Franklin Delano Roosevelt, yes. And he said it. He was elected, by the way, the 32nd President of the United States in 1932, which just so happens to coincide with the year I was born. And he spoke those words at his first inaugural to try to lift up the spirits of people who were experienced the height or perhaps the depths of the Great Depression. I was told, but I think this isn't true, that my mom said something about a Great Depression the first time she saw me. But I don't know, I think that was. Anyway, last week Doug said he believed in signs. And strangely enough, when I started thinking about this and I did that fear thing, I was surfing through the TV, and on PBS, there's Franklin Delano Roosevelt saying, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." Wow. And then a few days later, I'm reading Michael J. Fox's book, and I get to a chapter, and there's that same saying, "You have nothing to fear but fear itself." So I figured my son in his class, or not. So during the Great Depression, unemployment nationally was around 25%. Imagine a quarter of the people being out of a job. And people were lined up in the streets to get a bowl of soup so they could sustain themselves for a day or so. At our farm up nearby on Mount Nebo Road, men would come walking to that farm, and at that time it was a dirt road coming up there and kind of out of the way. But they came to knock on the door and ask if they could do some chores so that they could get some food and maybe sleep overnight, and they could sleep out in the barn on a straw mattress. They did anything they could to sustain themselves. So fear was all over the place. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt began to try to buoy the spirits of the people who were fearful. And give them hope, and I think that's what we all look for, hope for better things to come. Now, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had been afflicted with polio in 1921, when he was 39 years old. Yet, 11 years later, he was elected president. And unbelievably, not many people were aware that when he stood at the podium, he was on braces that kept him erect, and that to get to that podium, the Secret Service had to practically carry him down, just hold him under the arms. Can you imagine that happening today? That no one would know that a president was in a wheelchair most of the time? My goodness, the news would be all over that. So he had great courage. He had been governor of New York, he had been a senator, he had been on was the Secretary of the Navy for a while, so the man was a powerhouse. But in those days, there was hardly any safety nets. There was something called relief. I think maybe Ray would remember people being on relief. And it was kind of embarrassing, because in those days you didn't want to be on relief, because relief didn't give you much relief. It wasn't set up very well. So FDR offered a hand out to people who were out of work, and he formed two government agencies called the CCC and the WPA. The CCC was the Civilian Conservation Corps, and they did things like cutting down trees, cleaning out forests, things like that. The WPA was the Work Progress Administration, and they did things like fixing roads and so forth. Now, it wasn't, not everybody liked that idea. It was a little but it still gave people some hope, at least a few of them. A couple weeks ago, I met Chet Heater. He came to Durwood's birthday party, and he lived right over the hill from us up in Mount Nebo. And we kind of laughed about how we didn't know we were poor. We used to have a lot of fun, but they would come over and play, and we would go over to their house, and we used to help each other out. Now, we had a farm, and we had animals, and we had milk, and a lot of times we had more milk than we could use, or eggs than we could use, and we would give them to the Heater family or the Christian family on the other side, and that was their last name, Christian, not. But anyway, and in turn, Chet's mother would come over and help with us with the farm and with the little resort we had started. And one Christian would come over and fix the cars that my father had. So there was help. We did help each other. Now today, some of the same problems are existing in our present society. And a lot of people are afraid of losing their jobs, losing their homes, getting sick, not being insured, and being unable to provide for their families. And our fears are too often magnified, out of proportion by the intense media. Today, we have media all over the place. And when you listen to a news report, what's the first thing you see? The fire that happened, the explosion that happened, the murder that happened, the war that happened, the genocide, or some virus that exists in the world. Scares us to death. And two 30-second promos for a new show, innocently called Legends, which you think would be about people who are really great, legends. Well, there were at least 10 scenes of guns being fired at people and people getting beaten up. Nice legend show. And I had great hopes last year for a show that was titled Believe. Now, wouldn't you think Believe would be just great? So I watched the first episode, and there was a young girl who had supernatural powers, and she was being chased from the first scene to practically the last. Someone was chasing her all over the place, the bad guys, and I thought, well, that's not going to be a great one either. And mercifully, they took it off and canceled it after a few episodes. Now, in the news lately, we have the fear of ISIS, that Iraqi-Syrian group, and they are a terror group. But then they kind of went out of the news because I think Russia came along and the Ukraine, and then we would have to be afraid of Russia that they were going to come over here and bomb us and blah, blah, blah. And, but then they kind of got out of the news, so they put on the back burner. That's what the news reporters do. And then we followed that up with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and they were going to start another war internationally. That's kind of on the back burner, but this week our fear is what? Someone came into the United States, and what did they have? Ebola, yes, so now we all have to be afraid that we're going to get Ebola virus. Even though we're told that it's not spread through the air, it's spread by, yes, if we kiss somebody. All right, or something like that. Anyway, when I was a kid, I used to be afraid because polio was scary. And thank God for Dr. Salk and Dr. Saban who came along and gave us vaccines to get rid of it. But there were two children that lived right about where Kingdom Hall is up the road here. And I would hold my breath from about the China King restaurant, it's no longer, come all the way over the hill till I got to Pocono Candle because I didn't want to get polio. One day it was going to come through there. I've learned a little bit better than that now, but I think it helped my lung power. I can still sing pretty well. So maybe there's some good in fear. And yes, I just want to mention that ISIS is back. That's back in the news, the Iraqi-Syrian group. And yet, you hear about all these horrible things and you think, scared to get out the door of my house. although I did the other day. Someone tried to rob me, but I wasn't scared. But I decided, my children actually won me a trip to go to the U.S. Open, just for a day, 2 days actually. And down in North Carolina. Now I was going to go by myself, and at my age I was a little apprehensive about doing that. What was I going to meet? What was I going to come up against? Well, I came up against a lot of people. The first one was a lady at the Philadelphia airport. When I walked in, she said, "Give me your e-ticket and I'll put it through for you." She got my e-ticket, she put it through, she showed me where to take my luggage, showed me where to go to my gate. Kind as can be. I had all kinds of people opening doors for me, young men, old men, middle-aged men, opening doors, being nice, offering to carry my luggage. I had one man at the U.S. Open who actually, as he saw me struggling to get to my van in the heat and puffing a little bit, came up and walked with me, ran to his car where his wife was waiting for him, I think, got me a bottle of water so that I could have some hydrate myself. Kindnesses all the time. Where are these awful people that we see on television? I don't know. But I think we need to see some of the ones that are kind. Now, here comes the commercial. In the last few years, Subaru, the company I just happen to be connected with, had begun a love campaign. They're short commercials showing people who love. And what I love best about them is they show men as caring, kind, wise men, wise fathers, not like they're portrayed on television as some silly, uninterested, and flawed idiots. Men, it's time you stand up for your rights, because my favorite commercial is one where the father is going to give his keys to his daughter to drive. And when you look at her, she looks about 10 years old. And he's giving her all these instructions. Fasten your seatbelt. Don't go too fast. Do this, do that, do the other. And she's going, yes, Dad, yes, Dad. And finally he reaches in and gives her the keys, and you realize that this is about an 18-year-old girl who's probably going off to college for the first time. And she's going to be alone. And the father is concerned. There's another one where the girl is trying to put a tire on her car. She's changing a tire and it's raining, it's miserable. And she gets it done, and the father walks around the back and comes and says, "See, I told you you could do it." That's the kind of men that I need and that I know and like. And so anyway, I keep hoping that people are looking for that. And I hope so, and I must say that Subaru sales have blossomed since these commercials came on. So the TV and movie producers should take note that maybe we're looking for something more than violence and killing and murder and all that stuff. In today's world, we have social services. Some of that was due to Franklin Roosevelt. No matter how you feel about any of it, he was the instigator of some of these things because he wanted to get the country back on its feet. And we have social services, and they help people out. And here in our church, we have Family Promise. We have people who work with Family Promise. And our pantry helps families stretch their food budget so they can eat. And we give children disaster relief, and we have other things that we give to. But here in this sanctuary, right here where we are, is our greatest safety net. It's you, and it's me. It is our enduring faith in each other, and in God, and in His Son, to help us through crises. I don't know about you, but I'm sure that Jesus had a hand in sending Pastor Harding to us when we were in need. Quite a few years ago, 12 years ago. If you remember, we didn't have a pastor for a number of years. And he came along and we kept him on. You know, some people say they found Jesus. Well, I happen think that Jesus finds us. So where do you suppose FDR got that phrase he used in his first enlarged poem? Could it be he might have read Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 and 23? Jesus said it more eloquently to the disciples who feared he was a ghost as he walked across the water to their boat. He said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Roosevelt switched those around a little bit, but the same message. And when Peter started to walk across the water toward him, and the wind blew a little bit, he became paralyzed with fear. That's what fear does to us. I've been there where you're so fearful that you just tighten up and you're scared to death. You should not. As he walked across this water and began to sink, Jesus reached out his hand and he drew him safely into the boat. And he said, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" So, my friends, let us reach out to each other. I'd like you all to take someone's hand. Anyone in this congregation, just take someone's hand. Yeah.
You want to take the hand?
Let's do it. If you don't want to take someone's hand, just put your hand out. Let's be like Jesus. And we say, "Do not be afraid, I am with you."
Do not be afraid.
Now, do not be afraid, I am with you. Amen.
Amen.